she was Hollywood's most vivid paradox. A girl who ran away from home with a boy at 15, yet spent decades boxed into the image of the proper woman. She was Coppola's muse, Laurence Olivier's new Grace Kelly, an icon of American cinema who in over 40 years never took home a major award. Diane Lane's story begins far from the red carpet. She was born January 22, 1965 in New York City. Her mother, Colleen Farrington, was a nightclub singer and Playboy's Miss October 1957. Her father, Burton Lane, was an acting coach with deep ties to Manhattan's off-Broadway scene. And when work dried up, he drove a taxi to make ends meet. But from her first breath, stability was a stranger. Her parents separated when she was just 13 days old. Her mother gained custody, then left. By age 6, Diane was living solely with her father, drifting from one residential hotel to another, no bedroom of her own, no permanent school, no family dinners, just the constant hum of a taxi engine, and her father's voice filling the air with talk of theater, philosophy, an ideal she only half understood. Burton was passionate but unpredictable, able to quote Dostoevsky for hours, yet forget to pay the rent. Diane loved him fiercely, but she also learned to adapt quickly to chaos. It made her an observer, someone who could blend into any room without losing herself, but it also taught her never to trust the word home. At 15, she made a choice that would alter everything. She left, flying to Los Angeles with co-star Christopher Atkins for what she called a reckless act of too much freedom, too young. When she returned to New York, she didn't go back to her father's. She stayed with friends, paid her own rent, and finished high school by correspondence. Then came a shock. In 1981, her estranged mother suddenly appeared, whisking Diane to Georgia without consent from her or her father. The betrayal cut deep. She felt like a possession, claimed, not asked for. 6 weeks later, after her father fought in court, she returned to New York, but the damage was done. Diane wouldn't speak to her mother for 3 years. In Georgia, Diane stayed with her grandmother, a Pentecostal preacher, in the quiet town of Bartell. The pace was nothing like New York. Days were spent repairing lawnmowers, eating canned meat, and living without a phone or stage lights. At first, the stillness felt like exile. Later, she'd realized it was a gift, a grounding counterpoint to the chaos she had always known. Those early experiences, divorce, instability, even being kidnapped by her own mother, would leave permanent marks. They shaped a Diane Lane who would always keep the press at arm's length, who disliked giving interviews, and who often stepped back the moment the noise of fame grew too loud. No one will protect you, she learned young, if you don't protect yourself. Her escape from obscurity came at just 13 years old. Diane was performing in the public theater's Runaways when director George Roy Hill happened to be in the audience. She had never acted on film, never auditioned for a major role. But Hill saw something, a stillness, a depth, and cast her in A Little Romance, 1979, opposite none other than Sir Laurence Olivier. From the first day on set, Diane didn't just hold her own. She drew every eye. Her expressions carried more than her years. Her presence steady even beside one of the greatest actors alive. In Malibu rehearsals, Hill told her, "Today you're going to cry for real. No tricks." She did. Olivier, whom she called Larry, treated her not as a child but as an equal. He told filthy royal family jokes, ate with the crew, and broke down every wall that fame had built around him. "He called me the new Grace Kelly," Diane recalled. But what I remember most was his warmth. The film's release catapulted her into sudden stardom. A year later, she was on the cover of Time magazine as one of Hollywood's whiz kids, but fame felt more like a tidal wave than a victory. "I didn't realize," she later said, "that was the end of my childhood." Within just a few years, she would become Francis Ford Coppola's muse and one of the most talked-about young actresses in America. By 18, Diane Lane had already appeared in Touched by Love, Six Pack, and 3 consecutive couple of films, The Outsiders, Rumblefish, and The Cotton Club. She was a millionaire before most teenagers had their first job. But stardom at that speed came with a cost. Hollywood wasn't patient with young women who carried too much soul for their years. Jen's on-screen chemistry with co-stars Matt Dillon, Michael Paré, Richard Gere fed an endless churn of gossip. A glance in The Outsiders was enough for tabloids to declare she and Dillon were a couple. At an age when most girls were navigating prom and final exams, Diane was learning the hard truth. Being admired wasn't the same as being understood. She once said, "I play someone's lover on screen. That doesn't mean I love them in real life, but a lot of people don't understand that." Her early roles, though critically praised, too often boxed her into dream girl territory. The perfect romantic interest with little complexity. That image blurred the line between Diane the actress and Diane the person. Every interview, every choice of script was judged through that narrow lens. She began to step back. Roles that recycled the same image, she turned them down. Publicity she didn't need. She avoided it. It wasn't a PR move. It was survival. Unlike many of her peers, Diane hadn't clawed her way up the studio ladder. She'd been plucked from obscurity and placed in the spotlight overnight. She had to learn very young that acting well wasn't enough. You also had to know how to survive a world that wanted to write your story for you. By her late teens, she'd begun to seek parts that would allow her to inhabit flawed, layered women, even if it meant less screen time. "I was often labeled a flash in the pan," she said. "But I was just a girl with a soul a little older than her years. That makes people uncomfortable." The glow of fame had its shadows, and Diane Lane was beginning to understand she'd need to walk carefully if she wanted to last. The turning point came in 2002 when Diane Lane took a role that would dismantle everything Hollywood thought it knew about her. In Adrian Lyne's Unfaithful, she played Connie Sumner, a wife who strays from her seemingly perfect marriage, not from lust alone, but from a quiet, aching loneliness. In a time when films often painted women as either saints or villains, Connie was neither. She was complicated, conflicted, and painfully human. The risk was real. Lane had built a career on likable characters. Now she was stepping into a role that refused to offer tidy moral lessons. It wasn't airbrushed, she recalled. It was raw. Then came the scene, the one that made the film unforgettable. Connie on the train home after her first act of infidelity. No dialogue, no flashbacks, just trembling hands, shallow breaths, and eyes trying to process what she had done. The camera lingered and the audience couldn't look away. What most people don't know, that moment wasn't in the script. After shooting a scene, Line told her, "Roll something." No direction, no rehearsal. Diane closed her eyes, let the feeling take over, and in one take, just one, created an image that would be studied in acting classes for years. Audiences swore they'd seen a sex scene on the train. There wasn't one. The heat, the guilt, the exhilaration, all of it existed only in her face. That's the power of Diane Lane when she lets emotion speak louder than words. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, a Hollywood Film Award, and a wave of critical acclaim. But the real victory was the shift in perception. She was no longer someone's girlfriend on screen. She was a fully realized woman capable of breaking hearts, making mistakes, and confronting herself. A year later, she surprised everyone again with Under the Tuscan Sun, 2003. Trading tension and betrayal for sunlight and self-discovery. As Frances, a newly divorced writer who buys a crumbling villa in Italy, Diane carried a different kind of story, one of quiet rebirth. No grand declarations, no frantic search for love, just the slow, imperfect work of rebuilding a life. Under the Tuscan Sun was filmed over 7 weeks across 14 Italian locations, some so remote the crew had to improvise just to get equipment in place. On screen, the sunlit hills and stone villas looked like paradise. But for Diane, the shoot wasn't always idyllic. "I ate all the pasta, drank all the wine," she laughed in one interview. "Then I missed my daughter so much I just wanted to fly home. I cried. I didn't want to be in paradise anymore." Her performance as Frances resonated deeply, especially with women over 35. Here was a heroine who didn't leap into a new romance to heal her wounds. Instead, she rebuilt herself brick by brick, finding beauty in the mess, strength in solitude. The film grossed $58.88 million in the US, becoming one of the year's most successful indie hits, and earned Diane a Golden Globe nomination. Audiences didn't just see Frances, they saw themselves, women starting over, not chasing lost youth, but building something new from the ruins. Lane's post-Tuscan career didn't settle into repetition. She sought characters who were flawed, overlooked, and quietly strong. In A Walk on the Moon, 1999, she'd already explored this terrain, playing Pearl, a young wife in the late 60s who drifts into an affair, not from irresistible passion, but because she no longer recognizes herself in her own life. The performance earned her an Independent Spirit Award nomination and a spot on Rolling Stone's list of the most underrated films of the 90s. In Secretariat, 2010, she transformed into Penny Chenery, a housewife thrust into the male-dominated world of horse racing. Against the odds, Penny led the legendary Secretariat to win the Triple Crown, shattering gender expectations along the way. The film grossed $60 million, and critics praised Lane's quiet authority. "I don't play lovers anymore," she said. "I play leaders." Even in supporting roles, she brought emotional gravity. In Trumbo, 2015, she played Cleo Fincher, the wife of blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. It wasn't a glamorous part, but through subtle glances and unspoken resolve, she became the film's emotional anchor. Critics called her the quiet pillar, holding up the story's humanity. Diane Lane's range extended far beyond indie dramas and biopics. She could step into blockbuster worlds without losing the intimacy she brought to smaller films. In 2008, she reunited with Richard Gere in Nights in Rodanthe, more than 2 decades after they'd starred together in the Cotton Club. This time, they weren't young lovers full of heat. They were 2 broken adults trying to trust again. The film divided critics, but audiences embraced it, pushing the worldwide box office to nearly $85 million. Many believed their chemistry felt real because it wasn't about acting passion. It was about living a hesitant, fragile reunion. She then made a bold leap into television with Cinema Verite, 2011, portraying Pat Loud, matriarch of America's first reality TV family. It was a role without glamour, a woman holding her marriage together while it unraveled on camera. Lane's performance earned Emmy, Golden Globe, and Screen Actors Guild nominations, proving she could disappear into any format without losing her depth. Then came her introduction to an entirely new generation, Martha Kent in DC's Man of Steel, 2013, Batman v Superman, 2016, and Justice League, 2017. As Superman's adoptive mother, Lane didn't need lengthy speeches or heroics. One look, one touch grounded the world's most powerful being back into the role of a son. It was quiet, human, and exactly what she did best. In 2020, she starred opposite Kevin Costner in Let Him Go, a tense, sorrowful drama about grandparents fighting to save their grandson from a dangerous family. The film, released during the pandemic, was small in scale, but powerful in emotion. Lane's performance as a grieving yet unyielding grandmother showed that even decades into her career, she could still carry a story's beating heart. Looking back at her body of work, a pattern emerges. Lane doesn't chase reinvention for the sake of it. She seeks truth in characters. Whether playing a young wife restless in suburbia, a leader defying the odds, or a mother holding her family together, she reflects the women we know in real life, complicated, resilient, and quietly unforgettable. For nearly 40 years in the public eye, Diane Lane has carried herself with a rare mix of poise, privacy, and quiet endurance. She's never chased headlines or weaponized her personal life for publicity. Yet, behind the stillness is a history of deep love, heartbreak, and resilience. Her first great romance began in Paris, 1984, when she met French actor Christopher Lambert. She was a rising American star. He had just gained global fame for Tarzan. They weren't looking for love, but something sparked. Instantly. A chance meeting at a New York party sealed it. Lambert spotted Diane at the top of a staircase, stopped mid-conversation, and said, "I have to go talk to her." What followed was a long-distance love story told through flights, handwritten letters, and stolen time between shoots. In 1988, they married quietly, far from the paparazzi glare. 5 years later, their daughter Eleanor Jasmine Lambert was born. For Diane, Eleanor became my true north, the anchor she would always return to. But life on separate continents, Lambert in France, Lane in the US, slowly pulled them apart. He preferred a quiet rural life. She thrived in the rhythm of American film. In 1994, after 6 years, they divorced without scandal or bitterness. They remained in contact for their daughter's sake, often appearing together at her events. Remarkably, Lane has never spoken ill of him. "We loved each other very much," she once said. But sometimes love isn't enough, and that's no one's fault. Nearly a decade later, Lane fell for actor Josh Brolin. They married in 2004 in a small hilltop ceremony. Just 4 months later, Brolin was arrested after a domestic dispute, an incident Lane called a misunderstanding and declined to press charges over. Over the years, more public altercations and arrests followed, casting a shadow over their marriage. Lane remained publicly silent, but privately the fractures deepened. In 2013, they divorced, issuing a joint statement with no accusations, no messy legal battles, only a quiet end. For Lane, it was a second lesson in knowing when to walk away, not out of weakness, but from the strength of understanding what cannot be saved. Diane Lane is one of the rare actresses who emerge from the bright glow of teenage stardom without letting Hollywood's relentless machinery consume her. She never relied on calculated PR campaigns or formulaic blockbuster roles to stay relevant. Instead, she built a career on selective choices, emotional truth, and a fiercely private life. Her journey wasn't without turbulence. Early fame, 2 divorces, a public confession that stripped away her carefully guarded image. Yet, she never turned her struggles into spectacle. She stepped back when she needed to, returned when the work was worth it, and never apologized for protecting her own boundaries. That's why she's lasted. While Hollywood shifts endlessly, stars rising and fading in months, Lane has remained a constant, not by chasing trends, but by refusing to compromise the honesty in her work. Each role she's chosen, from a 13-year-old holding her own beside Laurence Olivier to a grieving grandmother in Let Him Go, feels like a deliberate piece of a larger mosaic. Women who are flawed, resilient, and profoundly human. She may not have an Oscar, but what she's earned is rarer, the enduring respect of audiences across generations. Viewers know that when Diane Lane appears on screen, something authentic will happen. It may be quiet. It may be understated. But it will matter. And perhaps that's the real lesson her career offers, that in a business obsessed with reinvention, sometimes the most radical act is to stay true to yourself. To let the work, not the noise, define you. So, what has carried Diane Lane this far? Talent, yes. Strength, certainly. But maybe most of all, honesty. The kind that allows her to own her mistakes, to walk away from what can't be saved, and to live without needing everyone's approval. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts. Because in the end, actors like Diane Lane don't just perform for us, they reflect us. And when a performance stays with you long after the credits roll, you realize something. You weren't just watching a character. You were watching a person alive in every frame. Diane Lane's love story with French actor Christopher Lambert began with an instant connection. They met at a party in New York, where Lambert spotted Diane at the top of a staircase and stopped mid-conversation to say, "I have to go talk to her." That bold move sparked a long-distance romance defined by handwritten letters, quick flights across the globe, and rare moments between film shoots. In 1988, they married quietly, away from the glare of paparazzi. 5 years later, they welcomed their daughter, Eleanor Jasmine Lambert. For Diane, motherhood became her grounding force. "Eleanor became my true north," she once said, the anchor she would always return to. However, their lives on separate continents eventually took a toll. Lambert preferred a quiet, rural lifestyle in France, while Lane thrived in the fast rhythm of American cinema. After 6 years, they divorced in 1994, without scandal or bitterness. They stayed in contact for their daughter's sake and were often seen attending her events together. Diane never spoke poorly of Lambert. Reflecting on their marriage, she said, "We loved each other very much. But sometimes love isn't enough, and that's no one's fault. Almost a decade later, Diane met actor Josh Brolin. They married in 2004 during a small hilltop ceremony. But just 4 months into their marriage, Brolin was arrested after a domestic dispute. Lane declined to press charges, calling the incident a misunderstanding. However, more public altercations and arrests followed, quietly casting a shadow over their relationship. Diane remained publicly silent, but behind closed doors, the cracks deepened. By 2013, they divorced. Their split was handled without drama, no legal battles or accusations, only a joint statement and a quiet end. For Diane, it was another hard-earned lesson, knowing when to walk away. Not from weakness, but from the wisdom of understanding what can't be saved. Diane Lane is among the rare actresses who transitioned from child stardom to adult success without allowing Hollywood to consume her. She never leaned on calculated publicity or blockbuster formulas to remain relevant. Instead, she built her career with intentional choices, emotional depth, and the courage to live privately in an industry that often demands the opposite.